Hi, Jim. All right.
Morning.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining for another month of our Blue Hill Peninsula Housing Forum. Again, if you don't know who I am or forgot from the past, I'm Greg Paduke, Regional Planner here at the Hancock County Planning Commission, also joined by Olivia Jolly, a colleague in the office. This is our second month of these monthly housing meetings funded by a municipal housing grant. And this month, we're just going to do a overview of the RFP that has been in the works as also part of this housing grant. I'll explain it all. I have some slides that I'll show that not necessarily to give a presentation, but just to facilitate the conversation and show everything that's going on. Before that, though, I wanted to remind everybody, and this came from Lyndon Nelson, the third year of the Talk the Towns Roundtable series is starting up again. And that first meeting is on Wednesday, November 19th. So that is next Wednesday, 7 to 8:30 p.m., second floor of the Stonington Town Hall. And it is housing related. The final report from the Deer Isle Stonington Housing Task Force will be shared. And after that, a discussion will proceed about how we can, accelerate housing and the production of housing in Deer Isle, Stonington, and on the peninsula. And I will be part of that conversation as well, among others that are part of that task force and some other folks that are invited for that. So again, that is next Wednesday, second floor of the Stonington Town Office from 7 to 8:30 p.m. if you are so inclined to attend.
Oh, I had that down as 6 o'clock, so huh.
Oh, okay.
We should
Well,
verify. I'm not sure I have it right. I may have marked it wrong, but I have a conflict that night, so I don't know if I can be there.
yeah, the thing though, the release that Linda sent me sent 7, but I will double
Okay,
check
I'm
and
probably wrong. I just had it down.
okay. Well, I'll follow up with that regardless.
Penobscot Bay Press says 7 to 8:30 p.m. on the second floor of Town
Okay.
Hall. I'll put the link in the chat
Excellent. All right,
because I
great.
am dyslexic.
All right. Let's share my screen here and then we will get rolling. And you see this. We good? Okay. All right. So as we touched on in the first meeting, this forum and all the projects coinciding with it are funded by a municipal housing grant that was awarded to the town of Castine, along with the towns of Brooksville and Surrey. All three towns went in on this application together. The purpose being if more than one town went in for the application, more money could be awarded. And so that grant was awarded in the beginning of 2025. Contract ends at the end of 2026. And this forum is one of several projects within this grant, including some education and engagement on Nesterly, a housing inventory and usage analysis for the three towns, and then the three projects that are going to be completed by a consultant. And that is what we'll give an overview of today. And there's, I guess, to support all the projects in this grant was a steering committee was formed before we really started getting work underway. And those are comprised of members from the three towns. And so Kathy is here today from Surrey. We have Bruce, who's been representing Brooksville. Um, David as well, who is now in Surrey, but he's been part of the steering committee process as well. And so for all of you, you're more than welcome to jump in and chime in as I talk about these projects or share any other additional thoughts that you might have. And so among the projects in this grant are a project to increase and diversify the supply of housing on the peninsula, an ADU development project, and then the designing of the developer attraction plan. And instead of doing all these things, I guess, in-house, we decided to bundle them all up into one RFP, and we worked on that throughout the last couple of months. The final draft of that was advertised in the beginning of October, and then throughout the month of October, we were awaiting submissions, and we received 6 submissions from the consultant firms that you see here. And the plan is to review all these submissions, the steering committee will, throughout the month of November. And once our conversations and scoring has taken place, ideally we will have a consultant in mind, and that consultant will execute these 3 projects throughout the year of 2026. And we are planning on meeting in the next week or so to kind of talk these proposals over, and hopefully we'll come up with a decision at the end of the month. And you will all be briefed on that process. And of course, if you have questions, you can let me know. But the plan today was just to kind of give an overview of what those 3 projects are going to include, and then finally how you can be involved in those projects. The first one I mentioned, it was a project to broadly find strategies and examples of ways to increase and diversify the supply of housing on the peninsula. And before we decide the elements of each project and the tasks within each project, we kind of, or the committee at least, identified what that target housing we want to develop more on the peninsula. And so we identified that target housing, which is something that all 3 of these projects will be assisting with developing in the future, as owner-occupied and rental housing that will be effectively available to and affordable for young families, working people, and seniors. And so the 3 projects within this RFP are targeting, well, we asked the consultant to target these types of groups when they were putting together their proposals. And so one of the main elements of this first project is utilizing all of the comprehensive plans that have been completed over the last several years on the peninsula. I think every single town on Blue Hill Peninsula has a relatively recently updated comprehensive plan. And so we asked that the consultant identify all of those housing and land use goals, objectives, and strategies, and use them to kind of put together a comprehensive implementation plan. What are the similarities between all of these goals in each individual town, and how can we effectively and efficiently lead towards these goals, rather than kind of doing everything separately. And of course, each town will have its own individual goals and tasks to tackle, but the idea here was to kind of come up with one larger implementation plan as a template for the peninsula to follow. Another task within this project was to identify innovative housing solutions, and that is somewhat broad, but examples that we provided were innovative configurations for seasonal employee housing, sharing examples of creative zoning techniques, identifying specific roadblocks and challenges related to the peninsula specifically, examples of financing, and other existing models and best practices for developing housing for the target housing supply that we identified. And the third task within this project is to take a deeper look at the impact of short-term rentals and seasonal housing on the peninsula, and how that is impacting the current housing supply and the local economy. So using whatever best data is available to determine, where is this demand for seasonal housing taking place on the peninsula? How is it affecting the current housing supply? How are local businesses and the economy affected by these short-term and seasonal housing? So that is project one of three. The second project focuses on accessory dwelling units. Of course, this is more or less stemming from LD 2003, which allows the creation of an ADU on any lot where there is single-family housing is allowed. And so, three additional tasks to kind of facilitate the development of ADUs. One of which is to create a toolkit of sorts as a guide to accelerate production, providing models for fast-tracking projects, um, suggesting ways to ensure that accessory dwelling units contribute to the year-round housing supply rather than are there just built to use in the short term or seasonally. And then the hosting of a workshop or fair of sorts where builders and related constituents can come together. Interested ADU owners can also come together, and there can be some commingling and sharing of ideas, sharing of resources. Additionally, a series of educational and promotional content will be created by the consultant during this project to boost awareness of ADUs, as if we're not familiar already, but some folks aren't, or how to best use an ADU. So that'll be important. And then also exploring strategies to create ADUs more accessibly and cost effectively. So that is project two within this RFP. And then lastly, the third project is a developer attraction plan with the ultimate goal of identifying what developers want to see, why they are and are not developing on the peninsula, and what ways can we increase that development to create the target housing that we have in mind. And so engaging developers will be a key component of this project. We've asked whatever consultants will be working on this to hold interviews and focus groups to better understand the developer side of the process and understand obstacles that they might be going through, asking for strategies and ways to streamline the planning and development process. And some examples of that included guidelines to outline steps for approval and suggested best practices on relevant land use laws, model ordinance language, to share examples of, conditional zoning or other regulatory allowances that could be done, examples of projects and ways to incorporate both housing and land conservation, examples of various water and wastewater infrastructure, and other creative financing options such as TIFs and things like that. So a wide range of possible ways to streamline the development process, asking for examples and guidance on this, as well as ways to streamline the permitting process, sharing any models and best practices there. And then finally, we identified getting local tradespeople is obviously an issue. The availability of and even just the education of that is an option for in the workforce. And so increasing options for attracting tradespeople, and ideally kind of arranging some in-school speaking events to talk to the youth and the younger generation about how the trades can be a valuable career choice, and identifying obstacles for why it has been difficult to attract tradespeople. And so those are the three projects within the RFP. And again, plan is for one consultant to be managing all of these projects with the assistance of the steering committee and of course other peninsula stakeholders as well. Another element of this housing grant is the establishment of a housing task force, which we are in the process of putting together. Ideally, there will be representation from each town on the peninsula, and really the goal of this task force is to provide another layer of guidance and input and um, strategic help in how these projects progress, providing feedback on what the consultant is working on, sharing resources, answering questions that a consultant or firm might have to really give them the best and most effective way to help the peninsula specifically. And so if you are interested in being part of that, I encourage you to reach out to myself or Olivia or anyone else that's in the towns of Castine, Brooksville, or Surrey. We'd love for you to be part of this and have your voice shared as these projects continue. Other ways that you can be involved as we move forward is promoting and attending any public engagement sessions that are part of these three projects, as well as additional projects in this grant. Um, there will be educational and promotional materials that will be created, and helping with distributing those will be huge. I'm sure that the firm working on these projects will need some sort of assistance with building connections or talking to certain individuals. So any sort of way that you can help facilitate that would be great, as well as sharing any projects that your town is currently working on that might be related to one of these three projects or adjacent to these three projects. How can we bundle all this together? And lastly, all the data and information is out there, but anecdotal experience is just as useful sometimes as far as how these projects can be influenced or how you're affected. And so any way that you can share any of that will be helpful moving forward for moving these three projects along. All right. So that is a quick overview of the three projects that will be taking place, I guess, throughout 2026. Kathy, Bruce, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add that I may have missed, or if anyone else has any questions, can kind of open it up. Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
I don't really have a lot to add. It's just having already read through the proposals.
Oh, excellent.
I think one thing to kind of reiterate that Greg has already brought up is that having the proposals came from companies all over the US. So they're not necessarily local, and I think they're going to need some kind of, if they don't already have some kind of local component, which some do, they're going to need input from people locally to kind of orient them to what happens here. I would say one example is that there's a huge reliance on kind of analyzing zoning, which is partly our fault for like putting it in the RFP so prominently. But there's virtually no zoning on the peninsula. I mean, Castine notwithstanding, but there's also no housing. So it can't be that the zoning is what's preventing the housing. So let's not spend a lot of time like trying to tweak zoning in an effort to make housing. And so I think just getting them to the point where they understand what's going on here is going to be really essential. So I would advocate for anyone who wants to be part of that, really.
Yeah, that's really important. Thanks, Bruce. As I mentioned, this task force that we're hoping to put together, those meetings won't take place monthly as frequent as this forum will, but more or less as the consultant firm is working on these projects, we might need to get together and discuss how things are moving forward, or if they're asking for feedback, this group can come together and ask for and provide that feedback. And so, again, I definitely encourage you to reach out to myself or anyone else involved with these projects for being part of that. Any other questions or comments on these three projects and how they play a role or how they might be moving forward? David, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to tag on to what Bruce said. I remember when we had the vulnerability study done, that the engineering group, which I think was based in Portland, when they came out to the towns to look at the different areas of the towns, it became really obvious that they were relying on GIS data and Google Earth mapping to make their determinations about flood areas, but they weren't actually on the ground. And it wasn't until they actually came out to various parts of Brooksville that they realized that there were things that they missed, um, which wouldn't show up unless you actually were there in the community. And so I think that's a really good point about if these are nationally based organizations, or even if they're in New England. The peninsula is an unusual area, very distinctive, and so how we're going to work with whoever wins this award to, acculturate them to this community is going to be really important. So they're going to have to get support if we're going to get a good outcome.
Right.
Hi, I have a question. I'm sorry I missed the other meeting. I'm Ann Schroth, the Director of Healthy Peninsula, and we work a lot with older folks in the community, and housing repair and housing safety. And I guess I'm just wondering, in the first project, the target housing supply, is there a focus on existing housing stock, or is it about building new housing stock?
Absolutely a focus on the existing housing stock as well, and how we can best utilize that. Yeah. Obviously we all understand that building new is expensive and difficult at the moment. So if however we can identify ways to use that current housing stock, um, especially to serve, seniors as one population that I think could be beneficial from that. So that was a focus.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Especially as it relates to the ADU question as well, which
For
has
sure.
kind of a component of existing and new, but also very senior oriented.
We see a lot of people who are aging in unsafe conditions. So it really is funding, they're not about to build ADUs. They really need to make their existing home safe for them to stay in because they don't want to leave. And there isn't anywhere for them to go because there are no more nursing homes in Hancock County.
Right. I mean, one of the advantages of an ADU is that it could produce income for someone who does want to stay in place.
Right. Or Nesterly. I mean, if the
Mhm.
house can be brought up to, be acceptable, then Nesterly is a great option too. But unfortunately, a lot of the people that we work with aren't anywhere close to either of those options. But with, creative partnerships, we work with Habitat for Humanity, and we work with the Ellsworth MDI housing to, rehab some places, it is possible. But I think that's an important focus because there is a lot of that housing around. And if we're talking about affordability, it seems like that's where we have to focus a lot of attention.
Mhm.
Greg and I just attended the Northern New England APA conference in Portland last week. And I'll have to say, I went to a bunch of housing things, as did Greg. And I don't know what you take away from it, Greg, but I was very discouraged because clearly it isn't a zoning challenge here as much as it's a lack of infrastructure in Deer Isle. We don't have water and sewer, and most of the developers are saying, we're just not going there. If you don't have water and sewer, we can't do the density we need to build affordable housing. And that's incredibly discouraging.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. I think in at least a few of the developer sessions that I went to, they pointed out specifically if no infrastructure is available, it's a pretty big turnoff. And so, yeah, I think using that existing housing stock is an alternative that we'll probably have to lean into. Even some of the zoning examples that they shared for rural, smaller communities, not as relevant to
No,
communities of our size around the
still
peninsula.
suburban.
Yeah. I'm curious if anyone in your towns has been part of implementing a comprehensive plan at this stage and any sort of efforts that have been taken. Because I know we're in this first project, we're asking for a larger implementation plan. And as part of that, I should mention, I have already put together spreadsheets of all the housing goals from each town and all the land use goals from each town, and that's something I'll provide the consulting firm to help them move forward with creating an implementation plan. But I'm wondering if anyone else has been part of that process.
I'll
Roberta,
say
go
that Deer
ahead.
Island, Stonington, I mean, Deer Isle adopted a comp plan last year, and the Housing Task Force, which is giving their final presentation on the 19th in Stonington, has been working away, and we both have economic development committees in our towns, which are also looking at housing. We have a housing opportunity program grant we're working through right now, and a Maine service fellow, all trying to figure out housing. So we're definitely engaged in the issue.
Yeah, excellent.
Avery, Kathleen Kazmierzak from Brooklyn. I was part of the comprehensive plan and it was voted in, but there has been no task force that I'm aware of developed for housing. It's a huge issue here in Brooklyn, and there's not a lot of areas available for somebody to come in and do some of those things unless it's private. And so far, there's not been. I only know of a couple of places that have some property that now have, or there's like one place where there's 3 lots that are going to be developed, but they've been requested by people. So again, it's not the type of housing you're talking about. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you what's going on in Brooklyn. I can follow up with that because I will be seeing the select board and I can ask more questions. Thanks.
Yeah,
Hey,
that would be great if you could do that.
hey, Greg, this is
Yeah,
Roberta from
yeah,
Castile.
hi, morning.
Hi. Um, and we are actually rolling out our comp plan implementation plan next week, Wednesday, the 19th. And we're going to be rolling out our working groups. We kind of took a different approach. We put all of the goals and objectives from every chapter in a big pot. And then we sort of reorganize them based on marine and harbor and housing and different groups. And we're going to be rolling that out next week. So we will keep you informed as to how it goes. It's a little different approach, but we did start our housing committee early. We started it several months ago,
Mhm.
just so they could be working with you guys. But anyway, we'll let you know.
Excellent. Yeah, great. David, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Kathleen in Brooklyn. The last time I had talked with the select board, which was probably a year or so ago, that there was a town parcel about 40 acres that they had done soil studies on and identified a couple of 2 or 3 acre areas within it that were buildable. And I'm wondering if there was any progress on that.
No, actually, David, there hasn't been. That property is actually not far from where I live. I know about that. And it really, I don't know if they're looking for someone privately to come forward and do something with it. You're right, it is. But I'm not sure how many houses they actually could put on that because of where it's located. But as you know, Brooklyn has a lot of wet
Yep.
land. And it's funny because you look at the maps and you go, wow, look at that spot, and it's like, no, not unless you're putting it on stilts. So, we do run into that issue here, but that's like I said, I'm going to be talking with the select board anyway about something else. So I'll bring these things up. This is my first time being part of this. So, I'm hearing a lot and learning a lot from all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, when I had last talked with David,
Yeah.
talked about duplexes.
Yeah.
But I think it was again, where's the funding going to come from, or who's going to build it, and how they're going to handle it? Would it be town owned? And it's just a lot more complex.
Yeah, it does get complex. I don't think the town's interested in owning it. I think they really, really do want to move it to someone privately, but I'm not sure how that's all going to play out. Right now, we're dealing with the church in town, so that's another issue. So that's kind of taking the forefront. Thank you.
Hi, Kath. This is Blossom. Hi, also Brooklyn. We're on the church and the housing committee together. So yes, the town has been pretty explicit in not wanting to be landlords. So looking for an outside source is what we've or that's why I'm on all these different committees trying to find the best possible choice for us. Thanks.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme from other towns as well. Kathleen from Stonington. Hi, good morning.
Morning all. Um, this has been interesting, and just to add to this, of course, Stonington, I mean, we've been working hard on the housing. Jim's right. We do have a joint task force because there's been some stumbling blocks with, other housing projects and stuff, and some barriers to it that, we found. The town overall itself, we did implement, rental registration ordinance with the Airbnbs. And the other thing is too is I don't think that people should lose sight of. I'm on that property task force governors that the state implemented to look at property taxes. And of course, a lot of that ties into housing, too. And, one thing to realize is Maine is the number one in the United States that 50% of the ownership is non-residents. Vermont second, and I think Massachusetts, no, New Hampshire is second. And I mean, and that is a huge hurdle for anybody trying to deal with housing because this place here is exceptionally attractive for this. And I think a lot of this has to be on the state itself to decide, does it want to be a state of sustainable communities, or does it want to be just basically a seasonal economy that is only active for a few months while everybody literally pretty much starves to death with it because that's what's happening. And you can't change that, too much. The other thing is too is working within the housing, there are significant barriers to funding for it. And the state needs to make it easier in rural areas for them to be able to, either get funding for housing projects. A lot of it is tied to, rural healthcare needs we just don't have here. And if you can't, get people to, either because of the funding structures that they have, either for, addiction needs, or they can't drive, or, they need rise to doctor's appointments, there's no way a play housing that has taken that money can do these. You just can't. And also too, the state has a list about who gets, housing and who doesn't. And that makes it very, very, very hard for somebody trying to work on their own housing needs in their own areas. So there's significant barriers that's out there. I could go on about 1,000 things, but I won't. But those are some of the top ones that I say.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. I'm curious to see as part of these projects are we're asking for examples of funding, and I'm wondering how much examples that will be shared are can be done locally, or if everything is, to your point, from the state level or higher. I think that's obviously a very
Well,
challenging.
developers are not always, they're not always really forthwith with information. Either that's one thing that I found out you have to be very careful of.
Hmm.
I'll
Okay.
volunteer. One of the concepts that I did really appreciate at this conference was on, and I'll get the name wrong, I think conservation subdivisions, there are other names for them, but this is effectively what Island Workforce Housing accomplished in Deer Isle by raising funds and purchasing a piece of land, most of which was conserved through Island Heritage Trust. They held out a part of that land for a subdivision with 5 duplexes. And there were several examples given at the conference of that working. I'm still trying to fathom quite, my thought was that you could put the septic and maybe the wells out in the conservation land so that you didn't have to have so many wells, one for each lot. But those are details that could be worked out. But I thought it was promising. A little harder in growth areas because conservation land probably doesn't belong in a growth area. So not quite sure how we make those two things work together, but it was an attractive concept.
I think it's a model that can be followed. And I guess kind of relating to that, next Wednesday, the Schoodic region also has a monthly housing forum. And Pam Dool, the executive director at Island Workforce Housing, is going to be giving a talk on the project in Deer Isle, as well as providing updates on how the project in Stonington is going. So you are all, I can share the link to that meeting as well, and you're more than welcome to join if you wanted to hear her talk about that more if you haven't already. And I know at the developer summit that we hosted a few weeks ago at this point, wow, that flew by. She mentioned a lot of philanthropy as part of the raising money for the Stonington project right now, and they've been really successful at that. And so I think a question or two for her is, how she's been able to organize that would be really helpful. Any other questions about the RFP? Yeah, David.
Going back to the Nesterly group, I read an article recently, it might have been in the Portland Press Herald, about the number of empty rooms in houses now. It was a different way of looking at housing stock, and often it's just the square footage of the house, how we're building larger square footage houses again. But the other thing is the relationship of the size of the house, the number of bedrooms, and the actual number of occupants. And the number of occupants has dropped considerably. And so there's a huge number of empty rooms in houses with one or two people living in, but one or more bedrooms available. And so I think the Nesterly approach, it will be really interesting to see how that might be leveraged. I think America, just in general, as a people, have a problem with their personal space, in the sense of they don't want to introduce strangers or other people into their space. And I mean, I have my own feelings about that. And so I think the whole Nesterly concept, that's going to be a real challenge in terms of building the degree of trust that's required for that to work effectively. And I'm just putting that out there. But what the article did say was that there are enough empty rooms in the houses in Maine that tomorrow, if you had a program, that it would provide all the housing space that was needed, that were the shortfall. I mean, it's not ideal, but that's an existing housing stock that's available. So I'll just throw that out there.
I put a link in the chat. George Borowski had emailed either this group or a different one about that article in Maine Monitor about Maine building homes faster but emptier.
Yeah.
And that has that exact number.
I sent that to George to look at. It was to me, it was fascinating because I never thought about it in that light. And so clearly there's an opportunity there if we can figure out how to do it. I think Nesterly's been kind of thin on their actual results. I mean, how many placements have they actually done? How long did it last? And that's going to be very interesting to see how that works out.
Just one more thing on Nesterly. We at Healthy Peninsula did a informational thing on it last year, and there was tons of interest. People Zoomed in, people came in person. But Maine Housing got this grant, this one-time funding from the state to partner with Nesterly, but they did not do a very good job at all of publicity or educating people about it. And so I think if Nesterly is going to be something that communities rely on, there needs to be a lot more trust building, as you say, about what it is and how people can get support, both on the renting and the tenant side of it, because it feels confusing. There were a lot of questions that we got really good answers to, but I think people really need to make it a local thing, community by community, if it's going to be successful, because it is seemingly risky to have people in your home in that way, but it has a lot of potential, and lots of people were interested in doing it, but I think they wanted more obviously available support.
Reassurance. Yeah, that's really good to know, Anne. And as I mentioned before, we do have some funds to promote Nesterly on the peninsula. And so I think you can be a great partner in that, especially because you expressed that there's a lot of interest and helping us come up with ways that will make those conversations happen and make people feel more comfortable.
We had we
I
had
think
we had a short experience with Nesterly, and the people were, in another part of the state, and it just kind of fizzled out with a neighbor. And this person would be a good candidate still, but we kind of gave up, partly because there was no local person that kind of was able to come to spearhead it. Here's the house. What can we do? And I think that's with Nesterly. I think every town needs to have some kind of a point person that the people in the town know, as opposed to the state gave us one person that was a cell phone away, so to speak.
Well, also, I thought, Anne, what didn't you have somebody maybe named Lori in your organization who was trying to organize that?
She was trying to get the word out, but
right.
we weren't actually connecting people to housing. We were trying to help people get on. There's this, digital platform. It's pretty complicated if you're aiming for older people because you have to log on, you have to sign up digitally. So I totally agree. I think there needs to be a local connection to help people trust it.
How could we try to do that? Take that step? Any ideas?
Yeah, funding. It's going to take money. It's going to take either commitment from town governments, municipal governments to have somebody available to do that, or funding to a nonprofit like us to do it. But it takes resources. It takes hands-on, trust-building resources.
I wonder if our real estate community, the real estate businesses, they're always looking for a cause, if that might not be a good cause to get a bunch of real estate. I know that we did get involved a little bit with the real estate industry here with our housing group, because they do have that marathon race. They raise money and then they give money to MAS or whatever. But that seemed a very small project compared to having a local real estate agent maybe be the point person for that, and then reach out to the VFWs, the churches, those community organizations that know the people. I think there is possibility there with Nesterly. I know there is. It's just a matter of having that point person. The other thing I wanted to ask Hancock County Planning is, I'm kind of curious about, are any of these RFPs going to be addressing need? Because I see the need changing recently, and this is what's indicative of the changing need is I do see a lot of ads for affordable housing in the local newspapers now. And I'm kind of wondering about that. And also we do see a lot of low rent lower cost rentals popping up in Ellsworth and places like that. And we're going to have an 8 rental unit in Penobscot. And so Curtis Jaffrey's built a whole bunch of units up on Pleasant Street. I'm just kind of curious if there's any part of the RFPs that will address current need. We know there was a need 5 years ago, but I'm just kind of curious about the need. And to get that need information, the RFPs really need to run around to the Chamber of Commerce's and talk to the people that are, bringing in people for work, and how busy is that? I mean, are we seeing certain companies pull back because of the economy? We know there's a need for teachers and nurses and stuff like that, but I don't see the connection in the housing effort here to reach out to the people that need the workers and those workers needing housing.
Yeah, maybe I didn't detail it explicitly enough, but there is a community engagement component in each of these projects, and so and I think that'll be stressed to Bruce's and everyone else's point is that having those conversations with folks on the ground to really understand the need will be a very key element. And in one way or another, all three of these projects are attempting to target the need for housing on the peninsula in different ways. And so it's going to be addressed as well as long as the consultant is on the same page and we're in constant communication and all these firms are qualified to do so. And so
Yeah.
the need will be addressed and the projects move along. Yeah. Kathy, you have had your hand up.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Tracy from Surrey. I had a little bit of, I guess, an insight, or I don't want to say insight, maybe just a comment on, I guess it ties in real well with Nesterly and also with short-term rentals. The first one with Nesterly is that a lot of people use furnished finders to provide temporary housing or housing for example, travel nurses and that kind of thing. So I think there's going to be some competitive issues maybe, or maybe there needs to be some type of positioning for this is what Nesterly does as far as, making a room available in your house, blah, 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 versus furnished finders and what they do, because you're going to find probably, especially with seasonal people, even if they don't do short-term rentals, they're probably using on the off season, they're either going to use a local real estate firm, of which some of the local real estate firms are starting to do a lot with long-term rentals during the winter, specifically out of Blue Hill. Then secondly, you're going to have people that are going to use the furnished finders people during the off season as well to market their products. So there's a real tie-in, I think, between those and making any kind of housing available on a we talk about seasonal housing, but there's also a lot of short-term housing needs. Like, for example, people come into town and they're working on a project that you may be an engineer and they need someplace to live for 6 months or 5 months or whatever. There is a market out there. It's how you actually capture that. So those people are going to go to places like Furnish Finders before they're going to go to Nesterly, for example, because it's more well known. The second thing I would say on short-term rentals is this is really sticky, and I know Kathy down in Stonington has a lot of experience. I just saw she posted something. We attempted in Surrey to enact a short-term rental ordinance back starting last, I guess it was the beginning of last summer. There was a working group, and I wasn't part of the group, but I attended all the meetings, was very aware of the ordinance that was being developed. And I guess two observations that I have is how the data for the short-term rentals actually gets collected, because what ends up happening is a lot of people will use a source like AirDNA or something like that, which actually takes a look and crawls through where people are publicly making their places available online through like Airbnb and Vrbo, those kinds of things. But there are a lot of people that are privately renting their property, which you're never going to be able to know about unless you have some type of ordinance or some type of required registration process. So that's number one. The second thing is, it's very sticky, is that, and this goes back to maybe elderly people that have, maybe a mother-in-law apartment that, their family's gone, they can use that to rent or whatever. A lot of people don't want to come out of the shadows and declare their income because there's very strict rules. I see a head shake there. If you're doing short-term rentals in the state of Maine or in any other state, you're supposed to be paying, taxes to the state, because of you're making that lodging available. Obviously, you're going to have to pay state and federal income tax on that income. So people don't want to be in the, they don't want to come out to the sunshine. People that use Airbnb or Vrbo or whatever, obviously they're getting a 1099 from those companies. It's very easy to track them. But there are people that don't want to come out. And so I think it's going to be very difficult to find them. And then secondarily, I don't know how much resources can really be thrown at this before it goes down a black hole. Not saying that it can't be done, but it's an area I know quite a bit about, and it's just very sticky. I mean, in Surrey, we couldn't even get people to agree to just registering that they had a short-term rental. They were going to grandfather everybody in. It was not going to be onerous on short-term rental owners, but people would not do it. It fell flat. So that's just my input on that.
I think that's a very good point about, I mean, if you have an elderly person that's renting a place, do they want to have to totally redo their tax return to take in, in the income they're getting, and then they have to depreciate the house and all their expenses? It's a big jump for somebody to do on a bookkeeping side. There's no doubt about it. And I guess the question would be, especially for Nesterly, is there would have to be some kind of bookkeeping help for people that wanted to do that, and they'd have to understand the implications of additional income.
I lived
I like
with a
I'm
79-year-old
sorry.
woman on Swans Island, and she had to transfer the ownership to her daughter early to be able to rent out her space and not lose any of her benefits,
Exactly.
medical benefits, anything like that, to be able to generate income. And if you don't have a child who you actually trust to not kick you out
Yeah.
once you sign over the house to them, you don't have an opportunity to do that and actually benefit from it. And she had some real scary experiences where she had to put locks on bedrooms and other things, even renting locally.
I'll say one more thing and I'll be quiet. I do like the idea, though, of if that concept of Nesterly takes off or it's something that the peninsula wants to do. I agree that there should be some focus or some type of help for people, because when you get into these situations, people need somebody to help them and hold their hand, and that should be a goal, obviously not part of the RFP. But I would think that if something works for this process for the peninsula, that somebody would think about the fact, even if it's a volunteer position, that there is somebody that helps to handhold.
I'm wondering if there's a legislative answer to the Nesterly income problem, in that if there was some standard set up that income could be exempt from any kind of state taxes, and maybe
Specifically for seniors.
specifically for seniors.
Yeah.
Those are all really valuable points, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. I probably would have taken me a while to connect the tax return and all of that information to Nesterly. So that's really good thinking. Blossom, you've had your hand up.
Hi, yeah. So I heard about Nesterly about a year and a half ago, I believe. And at that time, Nesterly was claiming 100% success rate. Now that makes me nervous because it seems impossible. If they were saying 80 or 90, you know what I mean. 100% seems a little too good to be true. So unless that number has changed, I would just say maybe a little bit of caution on the Nesterly front, because it seems like some kind of data is skewed there.
If they've only had two people.
Yeah, I'm not taking a look at their map yet, but it wasn't too many.
I thought it was doing out of state as well. I thought they'd implemented in Mass, maybe. I can't quite remember where they'd started.
Yes, I believe Noelle's from Boston, or is where she's situated. I think that's kind of where Nesterly started to take off. But yeah, caution is taken for sure.
I'm gonna look into those numbers for their claims and kind of where they're acting, and I'll get back to folks either over email.
That would be great. Thank you. Because it made me nervous. 100% is insane. It's not possible in my mind. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and you can see why they want to say 100%, of course. It's all really valuable feedback on the Nesterly side of things as we kind of plan on our plan of attack for how to promote Nesterly in the peninsula. That's really great. I'm glad we had that conversation. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here? We're approaching 11 o'clock. Bruce, yes, go ahead.
I have a random comment, a question, I guess, that I don't know the answer to. And it seems to me, building on what Rob was saying about the needs assessment, that we probably do need to figure out where this trend is going, wherever the trend needs to be. The article in the Monitor certainly pointed that out in terms of vacant space. But in the distant past, the marketplace has taken care of that, and we are way beyond that happening. And so a degree of flexibility about how this goes into the future, so we don't find ourselves implementing something that was good, 10 years before and seems useless or nearly so, or difficult to use, or later on, I think is going to be important. But I would also point out that, at this point, almost anything would be good, without any kind of negative judgment at all. I would say that, Island Workforce Housing has been doing this now for like 15 years. They produce 10 units, which is great because it's 10 units more than anyone else has done. But it's 10 units. And in Hancock County planning projections, they projected 1,000 units for the peninsula. So there needs to be some kind of reckoning with all those numbers and where we want to go and how it's going to work. And I don't have an answer as to how to do that, but I do think that flexibility is going to be a key factor in that. How can whatever it is that we end up doing be flexible enough financially, physically, to meet the needs of future housing requirements on the peninsula. And as I say, I don't have an answer to that, but I'm hoping that maybe the consultant might turn up something.
Yeah, that's a great point. And with the consultant too, is we're more or less relying on their expertise and experience to kind of help us provide things like that. Not necessarily maybe every single thing that we ask for, but giving their experience and ability to analyze the current situation, their advice moving forward will be pretty important, paired with our local experience, of course. All right, we've reached 11 o'clock. That was a great conversation, everybody. I appreciate everyone being part of that. This is recorded and a link will be sent out following, along with notes from the meeting. As far as December goes, we still need to talk about that internally. We might take the month off because of the holidays and things like that. But stay tuned, and we will be having more conversation about Nesterly as well as we come into the new year, and that's kind of when that project will take off. And this group will be really great for being part of that as well. Regardless of whether we have a meeting in December or not, an update will be provided as far as how the RFP process goes and the selection process and the consultant that was hopefully ultimately chosen and how we're moving forward with that. So updates will be coming in the future on that as well. Until then, thank you all very much and take care, and I hope it gets a little less dreary outside for all of us.
It's dreary out there.
Thank you very much, Avery.